And that's one of the most common things that humans as a species struggles with is the inability or the unwillingness to delay gratification. The supermajority of people are susceptible to going for that instantaneous gratification. So I could go do that. I could go in the woods for 2 hours, or I could watch 6 episodes of this Netflix show. Just dopamine, 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 dopamine. I'm feeling it, the effect of it immediately. Whereas the work that I do while I'm in the woods in regards to free thinking and starting to tie different threads together, that could be weeks, months, or even years before I get the reward from that outcome. Now, what's key is I have to do it consistently long enough that I can start to get the reward from the act itself, as opposed to a particular outcome. It's about enjoying the journey. Like that is the reward, the struggle, the strife, the pain. That's the reward in itself.
Welcome to another episode of Mental Health in the Age of the Metaverse. I'm your host, Christian Ulstrup. I'm joined today by Andrew Walsh. Andrew is a therapist, writer, public speaker, and consultant specializing in issues that youth and young adults face. He has spent the last 5 years researching, writing, treating, and speaking on the impact of technology on mental health, including social media, video games, and gambling mechanics in internet media. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me here today, Christian. Excited to be with you.
So how did you become interested in video games, social media, digital technology when it comes to mental health?
Sure. So I'm sure there's a long explanation to that one. The more simplistic or shorter version of that explanation is that roughly 10 years ago, I started to see that social media was impacting myself, as well as the people that I was with at that time that were in my orbit, like my college roommates and just acquaintances. So that was the first time that it got put onto my radar. And then roughly 5-6 years ago, I started to become interested in video game addiction and the research that was out there on it. And when I started to look at the mechanics of how video games are designed, I saw that social media was designed using those same mechanics. And those mechanics actually were taken from the work of B.F. Skinner from when he was doing research with rats in boxes. And the first industry to employ that was the casino industry in the form of slot machines. So I spent, roughly 5-6 years ago, I came across this, and the more I consumed, the hungrier I got in regards to the mechanics of the design and what was going on, unintended consequences. And all of that came to this period of crystallization where I saw behavioral health as it relates to youth and young adults and how it's impacted by social media and or video games and the link to gambling. And so sometimes we might use terminology like the layers of an onion. Well, the more layers I peeled, the more I realized that there was more to peel. And so it had so much meat on it that I kept eating and went down a rabbit hole for about 2 years, consuming all the research I could on it. So that's how I became interested. And then after consuming everything, I had a period of reflection for a couple of months, and then I started writing about it. And then I started speaking about it, and then I started seeing it more and more in my clinical practice and in just parents that I talked to at a non-professional capacity. It seemed that once my eyes were opened, I saw it everywhere, and I just happened to have some knowledge that other people were searching for, where they knew something was off, but they didn't know what. And so what started as a interest 5 or 6 years ago has become a consumption or a compulsion subsequent to, as of today, here I am with you, continuing to beat on the drum of it.
And so so it's both deeply interesting to you, kind of personally and professionally, but then you also do work with clients in clinical practice. You have a practice in New Jersey. What were some of the, what are some of the reasons that clients or parents come to you in the first place when it comes to these kinds of issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we were to speak with clinical terminology, we would say, well, what's their clinical presentation? But I'm not sure. I'm going to speak plainly because your audience is disparate. Not everybody here that comes to listen to this is a practicing clinician. So the common things that people present for is, well, if it's a child, my child just appears off, or they're having issues with sleep. They seem, I don't know, somewhat withdrawn, and they're spending so much time on this stuff, and I'm worried that there might be something wrong with it. It could be something like that, where a parent has a concern and they've noticed that something has happened to their child. If we go with the research on it, I mean, collegiate campuses, for instance, roughly 70% of college students report overwhelming anxiety at that moment or in the preceding 18 months.
70%.
70%, yeah. So depression used to be the lead-in, anxiety used to be the lead-in presentation that somebody would go to. Just when you edit this, cut this, because I just got myself tongue-tied.
No worries.
Make note on that. So depression 6 years ago was the lead-in cause for somebody to seek help at a collegiate counseling center.
Yeah.
It's roughly 34% of the presenting challenges. That has been surpassed, though, at this point by anxiety, where we estimate 70% report overwhelming anxiety in the previous 18 months. So that's in spite of us doubling the number of resources, by the way, on collegiate campuses. So we've talked more about mental health than we ever have before. We've doubled the number of therapists, number of groups, supportive structures, et cetera. Doubled it in 5 years, and it's actually gotten worse. So on college campuses, the leading reason that somebody would present is for anxiety, and that's what I've seen for my direct clinical practice as well. There's differences based on what age bracket somebody is in. So if it's a parent bringing in a child, it's usually they say something just seems off. I'm not sure what's happened. He seems withdrawn, not as communicative as he used to be, or she spends so much time on social media, but she's having more frequent crying spells. Her emotions seem to be, it just seems like she's struggling to regulate them. And then when we start to get towards my collegiate students, they're saying, hey, I'm feeling really anxious, or I feel like I'm doing everything I can and it's not going to be enough, or I'm down and nobody knows it, but I just feel dead every single day. So they're not speaking from a clinical perspective. They're trying to describe what they feel. So it just depends. Presentation and how old are they and who's reporting it.
And that shift from depression to anxiety, what is the connection between those anxiety symptoms and the use of some of these digital media?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the past 54 years or so at this point, we've kept stats on like the emotional well-being of our youth and young adult population here in the United States.
Yeah.
And so metrics that we would use would be depression, anxiety, loneliness, self-injurious behavior, suicidal ideation. So that's where I'm thinking about killing myself. Suicide attempt. I've attempted to kill myself. Successful suicide. As well as visits to the emergency room for psychiatric purposes. So we've kept track of this for roughly half a century at this point. All of those stats were decreasing until 2008. And then since 2008, it's gone up every single year and has not stopped going up. So it's increasing faster and faster and faster. So when I speak on this topic to parents or professionals, one of the questions I ask them is, what happened in 2008? And a lot of the most common guess is the housing recession. And it's a good guess, but that's not it. It was mass popularity of the first iPhone. So all of a sudden, you had a supercomputer with you that you could access anything, anywhere, at any time for the most part. So average American keeps their phone on them, like it's in my hand or in my pocket or within 3 feet of me, one's arm length. 97% of the 24 hours in a day.
Wow.
And so, okay, well, are you telling me that the iPhone is responsible for this? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's played a role in that now you had unfettered access to social media.
Mm-hmm.
And so based on the research and then my clinical practice and let's say roughly the 5,000 professionals that I've spoken with on this topic at this point, the way that I see it is the cell phone has proven to be a bridge to unfettered access.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, when you have unfettered, unrestricted, unregulated access to social media, the more time that you spend on there, the greater likelihood that we have for like FOMO, fear of missing out, or comparing yourself to what you see in others.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the biggest challenges that I see in the clinical work that I do is, hey, I think this about myself. I feel this about myself, but I see what I see in other people. But where we struggle is to take that step back and say, well, what I'm seeing in other people might not be a reflection of reality. It might be a projection on their own. And then with social media, we have comparisons. So as species, we're just inherently wired to compare ourselves, even if we're not aware of the fact that we're actually engaging in comparison.
Mm.
So when we look at, say, women who go onto social media, well, 90% of the time that they go on there, they compare themselves, whether they're conscious of it or subconsciously, to the pictures that they're seeing of other women. And of that 90% of the time, 90% of the time that they do that, they engage in what we would call upward comparison.
Mm-hmm.
So to make it readily understandable, that's like me comparing myself to a male model. So that means roughly 81% of the time that the woman goes on there, she's going to walk away feeling worse about herself because she's engaged in upward comparison with someone that is better than her at XYZ, fill it in. Now for men, same thing. We engage in comparison roughly 90% of the time that we go on there. And just the upward comparison is a little bit less. It's about 70% of the time, which means still for men, 3 out of 5 times that they go on there, they walk away feeling worse about themselves or inadequate. And it's that fear of inadequacy, the fear of rejection that confirms the inadequacy that leaves people in this predisposed state of not wanting to be found out, thereby I'm anxious all the time that you're going to see me and reject me. So I can't show you the real me, because if you knew the real me, the way that I see myself, you would reject me and I'm not good enough.
Yeah. I mean, I'm personally I think we're about the same age, but I'm personally so thankful that this was not a part of kind of my own experience at that age. Because, you know, as a teenager, middle school, high school, whatever else, like it's already, you know, a bit tricky, right? If you're just restricted to your physical local environment. I do wonder though, you know, as you're saying this, I wonder because if you're upward, you're doing that sort of like upward comparison, is it also possible that that could be a source of like inspiration or desire to emulate? Like, is there a positive version of that, or is that just not the case with social media?
Absolutely. So the way I conceptualize social media, and I do this with students, with parents, with professionals, whoever I am working with, whether it's an individual one-on-one or a group of 500 that I'm speaking to, is say, well, one of my hobbies is woodwork, and I like to build things. And so I ask the audience or the individual, like, what's a common tool that you would think of? And they usually get it right away, a hammer. Okay. Well, let's take that hammer and let's conceptualize social media that way. Social media is a hammer, and I can use that hammer to destroy something. So engage in like cyberbullying, upward comparison, where I walk away feeling worse about myself, or a whole host of other really negative things. Alternatively, I could take that same hammer, social media, and use that as a tool for connection, to build bridges to other people, to access information that would be important for my personal growth and development, or something that I'm interested in, or something that I want to learn more about. So inherently, I don't believe social media to be good or bad. What I think is important is how am I wielding that hammer? Am I creating or destroying? So the upward comparisons, for instance, that would be a tool of destruction because I am not initiating that. Now, if I go in and I say intentionally, I want to look at people that have been where I am, but are now in a different spot, like they have improved from where I am, then I'm intentional with it. Where we get in trouble is that unintended or unintentional engagement with social media. So one of my favorite questions to ask people is for anything is, well, what's your why? And so if I'm going on there and finding individuals that are bigger public speakers than I am, or better athletes than I am, or a better surfer than I am, because I want to see how they got from where they were to where they are so that I could emulate that. That's very different than me passively just consuming upward comparison where I'm going to feel worse about myself. So intent, what's my why, is how we make a determination of, is this healthy or is this unhealthy?
That is extremely interesting. When you say intent and what's my why, are you talking about that in sort of like the sense of almost at the extreme would be like transcendent purpose? Or do you mean specifically like before I get on Twitter, I have like an idea of what I want?
Both, actually. So this is probably ruffle some feathers, but sometimes I'll hear people say, just go with the flow of life. And I'm like, no, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
Because how could I end up where I want to be if I haven't spent any time reflecting on where it is that I want to be?
Yeah.
Or even if I know where I want to be, but then I just go with the flow, then don't take steps directly associated with trying to get me from where I am to where I want to be. What are the odds that I'm going to end up where I want to be? So it's like when I go on Twitter, for instance, to take your example, like, why am I on there? And most of the time when I ask people, it usually boils down to some iteration of, well, I'm just killing time, or like, I find it funny. It's like, okay, that's fine. I don't really love the idea of just killing time because I'm focused so much on intent and purpose in my day to day as well as in my life overall.
Yeah.
And then, from a transcendence perspective, more of, if I'm on there, what is it that I'm putting out into this world? Am I perpetuating something? And if I am, is it a positive message or a negative message?
Yeah.
It just depends on what's my intent. How am I going to wield that hammer? Build or destroy?
This reminds me of, I'm trying to remember where I heard this discussion. It might have been a podcast or something I listened to, but or I think it was a interview with the author of what's his name, Yuval Noah Harari, Sapiens or something. But he was interesting thinker, and he was talking about how because of the nature of technology, questions that used to be very sort of highfalutin and philosophical actually are now becoming like a very practically important, right? That question of sort of what is your why in the sea of like infinite content or whatever else, like going with the flow is not sort of just very practically not enough. Like you got to make some decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Self-determination is one of the core components of the work that I do with people as a therapist, but just also with the people that I'm not working with in a clinical capacity.
Yeah.
It's not my place to tell you how to live your life unless it infringes upon the lives of others in some sort of really detrimental way. So who am I to judge anybody with it? But self-determination means that you're the captain of your own ship. I'm not the captain of your ship. But you got to steer the thing. Or you don't have to, but then it's just going to go with the drift of it. And that's how you just move through this sea of life, which in my experience might be a little bit easier, but leads to a lack of fulfillment. I mean, so we ascribe meaning, value, and significance based on the effort necessary to obtain, whether it's a job, a physical possession, or more importantly, some of those intangible things like relationships, the more we suffer for something, the higher we value it. So if I'm just going with the flow, that means that I'm not really suffering too much, which is something that a lot of people run away from. Like, suffering's okay. It just means that we're probably going to end up with a set of things that, yeah, I like them, but don't have that much meaning, value, or purpose to them because I didn't pay the price associated with it.
Interesting. So what is it about the nature of how technology has evolved over at least the last 14 years, let's say since 2008, that has caused these problems in aggregate when it comes to mental health to be on the decline? Because based on what we just talked about, like you said, it's a hammer. So it's not obvious that, the null hypothesis, I would think, would be, it would just be ambivalent, right? Like, you have extreme outcomes on both sides kind of cancel each other out, but there is this negative trend.
Sure.
So what do you think's going on there?
Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so the way that I would say we should conceptualize let's say youth and young adults, so people under the age of 24. Let's think of them as really fast cars with terrible brakes. So one of the first regions of the brain to develop is the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. It's just a reward center of the brain. So that triggers the release of dopamine. For instance, when we have food or water, dopamine is triggered. When we engage in social activities or get social acceptance, again, dopamine is triggered. And all of this traces back to when we used to reside in caves. So we don't live in caves anymore, but our brains are still old. It's just evolution. So the reason that those activities were reinforced with dopamine, which makes you feel good, was because it increased the likelihood that you would get to the age of maturation. And then once you got to the age of maturation, well, then you have this new activity to engage in, sex, which triggers the release of dopamine. It feels good. It reinforces, thereby increasing the likelihood that you're going to do it. So all of that was meant to ensure that the species of mankind would survive. So I said, we don't live in caves anymore, but one of the first regions for us to develop in our brains is mesolimbic dopamine pathway, the reward center. The last region is right here, prefrontal cortex. That's not done until 24 to 26. That's where I have the ability to engage in executive function. And let's take that step back and say, just because I want to do this today or in this moment, it's probably going to put me in a compromised position, or it's probably not going to be good for me long term. So I'm going to take that step back and not engage in it. So that's the break-in system in our analogy. So youth and young adults seeks to maximize pleasure, avoid pain, and they really think about the here and now as opposed to the potential impact over the course of time of their actions. So it's always been like that. What's changed is it's all amplified now because they are able to engage in dopamine hits via social media from people liking what they post or commenting on it or resharing it or retweeting it. All of that is about social acceptance, which again, we're hardwired to see, but now we're getting it at just insane clips of which we have never seen before. So it's going to sound not the greatest to classify it as this way, but we have a bunch of dopamine addicts because they have access to potentially a limitless supply with almost, unfettered access to it whenever they want. So that's why social media, the mechanisms of social media has contributed to it. All this is also just amplifying the traditional, let's say, youth and young adult angst that you've experienced, that I've experienced, that probably most people in this world have experienced. It's just at a different level than anything that we've ever seen before. So when we think about youth, let's say people born 1996 and beyond, they're what I call tech natives. For the most part, for as long as they can remember, they've lived in a world in which this has always existed. We're the last cohort that knew about life before. So we're BT before technology or before social media. whereas they are native. This has always been in the world in which they've known. So that's the role that social media, one of the many roles that it has played in it, is unfettered access to quick dopamine hits, which gets us hooked. But then when we're not getting it, leaves us susceptible to really being cognizant of the fact that I'm not getting this. And then there's just the standard, I wasn't invited to something and now I'm looking online on social media and I see that all these other people in my orbit were. So like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah. I mean, that's something I've heard from parents quite a bit, is that inability to turn it off. Mm-hmm. It just becomes inescapable if you've got your phone with you. And so, something about the frictionless nature of it too. I mean, kind of, this is what make me think of this as you're saying it, is if you have those reward sort of mechanisms. You said it was the mesolimbic
dopamine pathway.
Mesolimbic dopamine pathway.
Yep.
If you have those can be activated with significantly less effort than the physical constraints of reality would have allowed you to prior to having access to like devices, then it would make sense that you would, constantly go back to the thing that's going to activate it. So it's almost like, I guess, to go back to my original question about the negative side effects, would it be then possible that there's something inherent about those things in the digital world that are, as it has existed in the past 14 years, that are activating the dopamine pathways that like pull people down in some way? Because because the sort of counter to that, I'd be like, well, why aren't there like 16-year-old billionaires who are like, solving, energy crises or something like that, right? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it boils down to one of the questions that I asked before. One of my favorite questions is, what's your why?
Right.
So there's the intent and purpose. So could we create positive reinforcement cycles with social media as currently constituted? We could, but we have to be intentional about how we utilize it. The other thing is these quick hits of dopamine, and they're very quick. I mean, they spike hard, they're fast, they're almost immediate, but then they're gone. It doesn't leave you feeling satiated. So you could go online after this, or let's say me, I could go on social media after this and 30 people could like something that I post. It's not going to fill my cup as much as engaging in what I'm doing with you right now, which is face-to-face, in this case digital, but still face-to-face actual connection that has some depth and meaning to it.
Interesting.
So it goes back to the point before, if we ascribe value to things that we have to work for.
Yeah.
The key word you used was frictionless. It's so easy to post things and react to things on social media. It's eating like a cheese puff. Whereas actual conversation and connection is like a whole meal. It takes more prep. It takes more time. It's not nearly as fast, but it makes me feel much fuller.
Is there, is the underlying like physiology or circuitry behind those two different situations, is that understood? Like, what's the difference? Like, what's going on when you feel sated versus the cheese puff?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
So it's, in essence, it's different levels of fulfillment. The cheese puff is, like in our social media example, would actually be most similar to like cocaine or slot machines.
Yeah.
Where it really causes like a sky high activation of anticipation. So when we look at neurological adaptation for somebody that's like a stimulant user, like cocaine, for instance, the peak activation of dopamine is not when they use, it's in the moment that they've decided I'm going to, and that initiates the anticipation cycle. So it's the same thing with social media. Social media, for instance, when we look at all the major platforms, they don't have you get to the bottom of the page and then you have to click next page. It takes a couple of seconds at most for it to do a little cycle, and then more appears on that same page. But that's enough for that anticipation to get initiated. The anticipatory cycle of like, maybe I'm going to find something that I want. And that's the same with slot machines. That's why you don't have, if you're doing a traditional slot machine and there's 3 different bars, they don't all stop at the same time. It goes 1, 2, 3, enough time for the excitement to build in you, the anticipation.
How did you originally make this connection between the gambling and social media?
Yeah. So it would go back to that 5 or 6 years back. In that time period, I was focused on trying to identify what I thought the next big thing might be here domestically in the United States.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of people that were talking a lot about the opiate epidemic, but there was so much research already being done on it. There was money being poured into it. There was a lot of support out there for it. So I felt like, okay, that topic is very pertinent, but it's very saturated at this point. Like, I'm not sure that there is, for lack of better words, the frontier there left for me to go and explore, because there's so many people that have already done it and they know more about it than I do. So I was trying to identify, well, what's like the next big trend or two that I see coming down in, say, the next 5 years. And I just started hearing whisperings for parents of, well, I think my son might be addicted to video games, or my daughter's really struggling with social media. And so I thought, all right, let me look at that. And there wasn't much literature here in the United States at that point on there. There still isn't. But there was enough that I said, wow, this actually might be a real thing. And then the light switch event for me was when I decided to expand my research to include the entire globe. It's like other countries have treated this as a public health crisis for 20 years at this point. The research is much deeper in Southeast Asia, for instance, compared to the United States, because they've been dealing with the impact of it. And so initially I thought, well, maybe that's just a cultural difference. And I do believe culture plays a role in that. But it's also just, they were early innovators with it. So everything that's happened in the United States has already happened in Asia. They just started 15 years ahead of us. And now the mainstream popularity that we have in the United States is showing that we're on the same road. We're just a little bit, further back. And then the link to gambling, for instance, came up because I went and got highly specialized training on gambling addiction from the Council on Compulsive Gambling. And as they were describing loot boxes, I was like, this is the same, or I'm sorry, as they were describing slot machines, I said, this is the same mechanics of video game design and loot boxes. And so I tied those two together. And then while I was researching it more and more, then I realized, wait, this is the same design of social media as well. So the underlying mechanisms are all the same. And it's all based off of really behaviorism, which was B.F. Skinner. So that's how the more I pulled on it, the more there was, the further I went down the rabbit hole, the further I could go with it. And a point that you made before that stuck out to me was, we're in this age where you can access any information almost any time. Yeah. But what I've seen is a significant diminishment in people's ability to actually think.
Yes. And
their uncomfortable or unwillingness to go into the Thunderdome with just their thoughts. Well, my Thunderdome is different trails. I get away from everything. I go into nature. I go for long hikes. I go for long runs and just see what comes up. So I had a bunch of research that I had put together on video games, gambling, and social media. And then I hit the trails and just let that marinate together and just started to see, with the passage of time, the threads that tied all of them together. And so that's how.
Is there, man, there's so many things, threads I want to pull on. One is what you're saying about this having sort of happened in Asia. My co-founder was born in Korea.
Okay.
And, out him a little bit. He maybe had a little StarCraft problem.
Yeah. StarCraft, 9 million copies sold. 4.5 million of them were sold in South Korea.
Yeah. And he was saying it was a big problem. Like, that was understood when he was growing up, that, StarCraft in particular, there were addiction issues, and it's interesting. And the point about, I guess 2 things I want to ask. One is around, the sort of the parallel mechanisms or these kind of design patterns popping up. B.F. Skinner. When was he doing his work?
Oh, Skinner. So he got his PhD from the University of Minnesota and then went and did all of his research at Harvard. His work is over 50 years old at this point.
Okay.
So we'll say late 60s, 70s is when he started to study reward schedules, is what we call it. So he had animals in a box, mostly rats, but he did some pigeons, he did dogs. But what he was really focusing on was, hey, how can I use rewards to increase or decrease a certain behavior?
Yeah.
And so a very basic example would be, how can I get this rat to push this lever in a box when I want it to? So the behavior that I want the rat to exhibit is pushing that lever. Well, how can I do that? And so he would give the rat a food pellet every time it pushed the lever.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one day, though, he realized that he was running out of food pellets. And so he started to ration them. And that's when the rat's behavior started to change. And he found that he could increase or decrease behavior based on how frequently he rewarded the rat for engaging in the behavior. And so there was a number of actions that the rat had to take, like push the lever 10 times, or there was an interval. The rat had to wait 1 minute, then push a lever and get a food pellet. So his first iteration was reward it every single time. His second iteration was, I need to ration these because I'm about to run out. And his third was, holy cow, what the hell just happened? That rat's behavior changed dramatically. How can I titrate this to increase the behavior that I want, pushing the lever to the point that that rat is pushing the lever nonstop? And that was to change the number of times that the rat had to push the lever before it would get rewarded and the amount of time that passed. So it's like if we fast forward to slot machines.
Yeah.
And I haven't won in a long time. Just one more. It's been so long. I'm due.
Right.
The odds never change. It's just we are able to fool ourselves into thinking, well, it's just one more. It's just one more. It's just one more. Well, the rat was
right.
Next time I push the lever. Okay. It's the next time. It's the next time. It's the next time. It's the next time. I'm going to stand there pushing that thing forever.
That's intense. I mean, that just the way you're describing that now, it's almost like depending on how this is used, I mean, it's kind of a corruption of something that's otherwise a virtue, which you think about like fortitude or being able to be persistent or something, right? Like, it's kind of taking advantage of that.
So that is a hot topic, right?
Yeah.
We see this in a totally different industry, like the finance industry, for instance, as it relates to retirement savings. So there's a good book, I believe the title is Nudge, where we know that we can nudge people to engage in healthier behaviors, for instance, the food that they eat or saving more money for retirement.
Yeah.
But there is the question of, is that an overreach by the government at that point? So where do we make that delineation between this is in your best interest versus I'm affording you the right to make whatever decisions you want as long as it doesn't infringe upon others? So in the state of New Jersey, for instance, somebody can drink or drug themselves to death, and that is their right. So as soon as somebody turns 18, a parent can no longer mandate their child into treatment because they are an adult. They are afforded that right. So it's like, it is nudge. So the first industry to employ Skinner's work actually was the casino industry. And it was slot machines. Before Skinner's work, slot machines made up, call it 10 to 15% of casino floor space. And you won on approximately 3% of the spins. After they used Skinner's work, what they did was they increased the frequency at which you win to about 43% of the time. Fast forward today, slot machines make up 80 to 85% of casino floor space. They make more than every other game combined.
Wow.
And the terminology for it would be like, wait, you said they used to win 3% of the time. Now they win 43% of the time. How are the casinos making money off of it? Well, they call it bleeding you slowly. By increasing the frequency at which we reward you, We keep you there for longer periods of time. The longer you play, the more they make because they have a statistical advantage over every single game.
Yeah, I mean, this is tough, right? Because there's almost like, I'm thinking about this as like a policy issue or something. There's a bit of a paradox you have to resolve here, which is like, on one hand, if you believe people's, making their own choices and everything else, well, if they're up against, millions or however many dollars worth of, scientific research and game designers and sort of everything else, like what's the correct course of action there from a public policy perspective? I don't know.
It's a really tough situation because if we conceptualize it as a tug of war, we say our youth or young adult is the entity that's in the middle. Okay, so we've got now parents on one side holding the rope, trying to do what's best for their child.
Yes.
On the other side, we have PhD behaviorists that have spent their entire careers focused on being able to increase or decrease a certain behavior. They're highly compensated for it. And they work in the design stage and implementation stage of the video game process or social media, for instance. So I've got people highly specialized.
Which schools are they coming from?
From all over at this point in the United States. Okay. Yep. So it's tough. I got parents pulled in too many directions to begin with. Then I have people that are highly incentivized and motivated to win that particular tug of war. And they're not doing anything that's illegal with it. So I was thinking about it from a policy standpoint. What do we do with it? Well, let's take the Constitution, which is over 200 years old. We've made 27 changes to it. So it's pretty tough to change things. And within there, we say you have the right to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So if we say those are core tenets, which they are of the United States, it's tough because we're going to go after this. Why aren't we going after like the alcohol industry or the tobacco industry? So the precedent is not necessarily set there. And then part of it also just comes down to the way that our government is structured with the influence that lobbying has. Companies have a ton of money, and so they are able to afford lobbying to get their particular perspective heard on the topic of social media or video games or the design of it. So other countries in the world have taken more proactive steps with it. The United States, though, we're a little bit stagnated right now. There's a couple of states that are trying to do things, but bills are drafted, but they're never, to this point, they have not been passed in any of those states.
Yeah. And I guess the sort of counter argument would be something about, probably free speech or.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which, those are two things you have to weigh. I guess, okay, so this is clearly, and I want to dig into this more. I mean, this is manifesting in public health issues. Like this is sort of, I don't think there are too many people at this point who would dispute that that's a cause for at least some concern. And you're always going to have political interests that are, influencing people in Washington or whatever else. There should be somebody who's an arbiter of the truth. So what does the scientific research say? Is this well understood? If not, what are the big question marks that still exist around this topic from a research perspective?
And so the topic being social media, video games.
Let's get really specific. Let's say social media and the impact on mental health.
Sure. I would say the topic is known, but not understood by the masses. So known in the sense of parents, for instance, have an intuitive feeling that this is having some sort of negative effect on their youth or young adult, but they can't quantify it and they can't articulate it beyond that point. It's just that lingering thought in the back of their head. Like something, it just seems like off, or this can't be too good for them. So it's known, but not understood. And that's where I come in. That's why, like, the school district here in New Jersey just had me speak to every 8th, 7th, and 6th grader that they have in groups of 20, and then all of the staff, and then as many parents as could come out for it. So they had me do 20 different talks on it because I have done all of the research, and my role is to disseminate the information so that what you previously knew, now you understand. And then with knowledge comes the ability to be intentional about how you move forward. But it's tough to come up with an effective path forward when you don't understand, because then it's just going to be a matter of luck if it works out or not. So I think the topic is then heavily researched and quantified, but this happens all the time. Just because research is done, how many people are out there consuming scientific journals,
right? And
then going around the dinner table or connecting with community members and discussing like, hey, did you read that last article that came out of like NASW? Right. Like, they're not doing it. Research is research, and then public is public, and there's not too many people that cross over between the two. And for the ones that usually do, one of the biggest shortcomings is researchers that speak as researchers. Like, demonstration of, to me, expertise on a topic is when I can take something incredibly complex and make it readily understandable to whoever the audience is, which is why I'm not speaking. I'm trying to avoid today speaking as a researcher or as a clinical professional, because I need to understand who the audience is so that I can speak in whatever language it is that they speak. So that's why I think, in summary, the research is solid. The general public is aware that something's going on. Most of them wouldn't dispute it, but they don't understand the extent or the how or the what or the why, or importantly, what to do moving forward.
So for somebody who's listening right now, who let's say has a 13-year-old daughter and has a hunch that, her use of social media is perhaps not, putting her in the right state of mind. What is the single most practically important insight that you can share from what exists in the research?
Your hunch is probably right, and treat it as such. If you have the hunch, I'd rather you treat something and it turn out to be benign than not treat it and it turn out to be cancerous. So I'm usually kind of going to go with the path that is focused on taking action or being proactive, as opposed to, well, I had this thought, but let me see. Just because life is so precious and it's moving faster than it ever has before. So that would be the first thing that I would do, is say, okay, if you have the hunch, then assume it to be true and act as such.
Okay. Trust your gut, at least as a first step.
As a first step. Absolutely.
One of the things that you brought up, I was hoping to circle back on, was you mentioned you'll go walking or sort of hiking on a trail to do some thinking and marinate on some of the stuff you're working on. Why is that not? That's something I found to be just like life changing as well, is making lots of time to just think. Why is that not more common? It feels so kind of fundamental. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I do. I would agree with your assessment of the situation. The commonness of it has certainly diminished.
Yeah.
And so your question of, well, what's the why behind that? Why has it diminished? Scientifically or neurologically, it's actually pretty clear to me from my perspective. So let's say, well, we're going to turn the question back onto you. So you go out and you spend time in nature, disengaged from everything, and you just spend time out there thinking. How good does that make you feel?
It makes me feel fantastic.
Okay. Did it always make you feel fantastic?
That's a good question. I would say, and this kind of gets to your point, I think, around the reward cycle time.
You got it.
I would say that, like, what I've observed is just the quality of my work, 4, 8, however many weeks in the future. That's when I really start to see the results from just the deep thinking. So I would say not not sort of immediately, but there's a delay.
And that's one of the most common things that humans as a species struggles with is the inability or the unwillingness to delay gratification. The supermajority of people are susceptible to going for that instantaneous gratification. So I could go do that. I could go in the woods for 2 hours, or I could watch 6 episodes of this Netflix show. Just dopamine, 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 dopamine. I'm feeling it, the effect of it immediately. Whereas the work that I do while I'm in the woods in regards to free thinking and starting to tie different threads together, that could be weeks, months, or even years before I get the reward from that outcome. Now, what's key is I have to do it consistently long enough that I can start to get the reward from the act itself, as opposed to a particular outcome. So it
becomes intrinsically motivating.
Yes, it's about we find the process rewarded, which would be like stoicism. It's about enjoying the journey. Like that is the reward, the struggle, the strife, the pain. That's the reward in itself. It's not what then comes subsequent to it. That's just the cherry on top of our sundae. But it takes time.
That makes complete sense to me. How do you explain that to a 13-year-old who's completely addicted to Fortnite?
Yeah, that's a challenge for sure. So this is where like, motivational interviewing, which is a therapeutic form of communication, would come in. So 13-year-olds addicted to Fortnite. I could come in and say, you're addicted to Fortnite. Your life's out of control. Your life sucks. You're not going to go anywhere. I'm just going to meet resistance. That's just slamming my head into a wall. So what I would do instead is what we call like a coming alongside technique. Instead of confronting you head on with something that I already know is an issue for you, I'm going to circle around and let you tell me about different things that you like. And we're going to establish a relationship that's not going to be threatening. And then once I have come around and come alongside, we are joined, then I can start to steer a little bit because I have that relationship with you. So that 13-year-old, that's going to be a process. It's going to take time. And once you've established the credibility of the relationship, then I can start to say things like, hey, like, obviously your parents think Fortnite's a problem for you. You're saying that it's not. I'm not sure where I stand on it. But let's do this. You keep playing, but you know me. Give me an honest effort. Spend an hour a day outside. Or go for an exercise or go to the gym 3 times this week. So I find a bar that's low enough that they're like, yeah, I can do that. I have the relationship that they will do that. And they're going to be honest about the fact that they've done that. And then I say, all right, well, let's do that for a week. And then after the first week, then it's, all right, let's do that for 1 more week. And then, all right, let's do this 2 more weeks. And then at the end of this, you'll have done it for a month. You come back, you tell me that your life hasn't gotten better, and we'll stop. But you have to consistently do it like we've outlined and like you've demonstrated for the previous 1 week or 2 weeks. You hold up your end, I hold up my end. And then I just give it time because inevitably, if they do it, it's been long enough that they start to get some joy out of it.
Yeah, so you meet them where they are and build trust. And there's
because I gotta meet them where they are. Because if not, then when we look at the research behind what we call therapeutic outcome, like what is the biggest indicators of success, whatever we measure success by? Therapists fall prey to this too. They think it's a particular modality that they use, like cognitive behavioral therapy or DBT or EMDR. It's like 50 different modalities, at least at this point. But a lot of therapists think like it's the modality that I use that's the most important. It's not even close. 40% of a client's outcome is determined by the client's belief in their ability to change and get better, as they define change and get better. 35% of it is the relationship that they form with the individual that they're working with, me. So 75% of it has absolutely nothing to do with modality that's used. Modality only represents roughly about 10% actually of outcome, 8 to 10%. So the key here is the first thing and the most important thing is a relationship that I create with that individual. Because that relationship is the bridge that I will then send across a bunch of tools, techniques, reinforcement, support, understanding, empathy. I'm going to send that across that bridge that I've built to really focus on that 40% of, yeah, you do have the ability to change. With that, 75% of the work's already done at that point. So I use my relationship with them to leverage their ability or their belief in their ability to grow and change.
Yeah, and that's a necessary precondition for like some of the more like tool based or
absolutely
more kind of routinized stuff. It's interesting. That reflects the experience we've had working directly with parents as well, where it's I find it very common that it's like in sort of the most extreme case, it's like I'm sick of this. I want to move to the woods, unplug everything. Implement whatever control, like the impulse is to try to like implement controls, which is really more in that kind of last bucket where the time and attention is best spent on those two others, at least to establish the solid foundation.
Absolutely. And my word of caution to the parents that want to disconnect everything and move to the woods, which I understand. Does it actually address the problem? Right? Because we're looking at this through the lens of like, oh, social media or video games is the problem. Whereas if we do that and we go to the woods, a better way to conceptualize it might be as like the boardwalk game of whack-a-mole. Okay, I've knocked down the social media issue and the video game issue, but now another issue is going to pop up because I haven't gotten to the root cause. So the better approach would be just unplug the machine from the wall. Like, let's get to the root. If we're not going to get to the root, this is just going to come back in a different way.
Are there cases where taking a more extreme approach like that actually is sort of the correct thing to do?
I would say that it is appropriate in certain instances. Sure.
Yeah.
For somebody that's really, really deep into it and their life has stagnated, it's just clear and undeniable that this is a massive issue. They're probably suffering from dopamine fatigue at that point as well. We're most likely going to be better off putting them in a spot where they could have some degree of a digital detox in a structured, controlled environment, and doing that on their own in the environment. The same environment would probably be a challenge for them because there's going to be so many cues associated with it.
Right.
So yeah, definitely in different cases, it would be something that we would say would be appropriate. Just depends on what the circumstances are.
Right. And with the caveat, based on your previous comment, it's not sufficient. Maybe necessary, but it's not sufficient even in that case.
No, because I mean, if that was the case, then they would have to stay in the woods forever. So let's go to something that is much more readily understood at this point, which would be alcoholism, for instance. We could send somebody to detox or rehab. We certainly send a lot of people to detox and rehab. But at some point, they have to come out of detox or rehab. And for our youth, in this example that we're talking about, it's most likely that they're probably going to have this in their life in some degree, like access to a computer or a console or a phone. So detox and rehab isn't focused on teaching the alcoholic to not live in a world that has alcohol, but rather to live in a world in which alcohol is always going to be readily available and make the election to not partake in it. So,
and that takes a lot of time and attention to get to those root causes.
It does. And it's easier, or you can expedite it by going more intensely, but you can only go at such a clip before too much is too much. So even if it was a solution, it's only a solution as long as that person continues to reside in the woods. And it still doesn't address the root.
Right. And living in the woods is not super easy.
No.
Not super easy. Interesting. So with the caveat that certainly the future is uncertain.
Sure.
You've gone extremely deep into understanding these various trends, where they come from, how we got here. Where do you see things going when it comes to the intersection of technology and perhaps these businesses that are making it available in ways that are not always good for the consumer or the user? There's so many different factors. Like what's on the horizon that's really getting your attention at the moment?
An overall trend that I'm concerned of, but I think at this point it's unavoidable. The die have already been cast. I think it's going to get much worse. I think there's a possibility that it can get better, but it's going to get worse first. And I would attribute that to the fact that, like, I have done all of this research and writing and public speaking on it, but I don't know anybody else that has, or the people that I know. Like, it's a very, very small group of people, and yet every time that I go and speak to a group of parents, for instance, they're like, "This is the first time that I've ever heard this. This is amazing." Well,
really?
Yeah, absolutely. There's just not enough me or other individuals that have this requisite knowledge, skill, and experience with it to speak to all of these parents. So, I might be helping 20 parents at a time, but there's a lot more parents than 20 parents just in the United States alone. So the pandemic made it worse. It also hit it at the same time because something else became front and center. We had just started to talk about it before the pandemic started, the impact of social media and video games. We had just started a national discussion on it, and the pandemic hit. So this has gone unfettered now for 2.5 years, and we would say amplified for 2.5 years with everybody being remote for such an extended period of time. So I think a lot of the damage has already been done, and we're just waiting for more and more of those consequences to make themselves readily apparent. That's why I say I do believe it's going to get worse, significantly worse, before eventually we have the ability for action to make it better. Things that I am buoyed by / concerned by simultaneously would be virtual reality. Okay, so I have the ability to connect with other people. Well, that's just like the hammer, using it as a tool of connection, which I'm very much a proponent of. A bridge. Like I'm there. Let's do it. But that's intentional.
Yes.
And my concern is that most people operate from a cognitive capacity that's not necessarily clear on what their focus, intent, or intention is. So one's passive, one's active. I'm concerned about the passive utilization of virtual reality, where you can get even further lost in an immersive world than the one that's here. And then there's also, what's your why? Again, it's dual-edged. If my why is because I want to use virtual reality as a platform to connect, I'm totally cool with that. Or to see sites that I might not be able to see in real life. Okay, cool. But I have intent. If my why is because my real life is just unenjoyable, or I'm not happy with it, but I feel much happier there, that has a feel of escapism to it then at that point. Like, well, what's actually going on in your quote unquote real life that you feel that way? And I understand the allure of going to virtual reality because you can leave all those problems behind, but even if you just leave them behind, they're still there. Just because I put something in a closet and close the door doesn't mean it's no longer there. It's still there, and it's going to have to be addressed at some point. So it's a matter of, for virtual reality, do I have intent and purpose with it? Am I active or passive with my utilization of it? And what's my why? To have new experiences or to escape from my life? So I feel differently about it, depending on what somebody's answers are for each one of those questions.
It's I've had some very interesting conversations with different folks about this, where, again, to the point about like practically important philosophical questions or like stances, it's there are a wide range of views on this. So one of the questions I like to ask guests is, the way technology is going. You talked about virtual reality, and AI is another thing. Everything becomes increasingly personalized and compelling and frictionless. You project that out 10, 20 years in the future, line between virtual reality and reality becomes quite blurry. And on top of that, I didn't even think about this until you brought it up, but like we are kind of that last generation that has one foot in the pre-digital world.
Sure.
There are going to be these future generations of people who potentially their first memories are in some ways like in the virtual world, and that's kind of already happening. So for not only given where the technology is going, but let's say we have these future generations who are digital first, and they're developing relationships, they're having, compelling experiences in virtual spaces. Does reality still matter?
Yeah, that's an interesting question for sure. Depends. So everything that I've done up until this point, all of my viewpoints are formulated based off of science, research, personal experience, professional experience. So it's like the way I see the world is just based on the set of glasses that I look through. And those have been shaped by all the experiences that I've had, all the research that I've consumed, conversation, etc. So from my viewpoint as, let's say, a researcher, therapist, and public speaker, I would say as the line becomes blurred between virtual reality and reality, does the real world matter as much? Is going to be dependent on what does the research show. So we've talked a lot about research today and how, let's say for the past 14 years, the research indicates that we've moved in the wrong direction as it relates to emotional well-being.
Yeah. If
that trend continues, then yes, I would be very concerned at that point of the blurring of the line between virtual reality and reality, because that means that people would be spending more and more time in a place that's worse and worse for them. Alternatively, if the research continues, which it will, in conjunction with virtual reality becoming more utilized from a wide stream perspective, if that research indicates a turn-in of that trend, and then ideally a 180 degree turn of that trend into a really positive domain, then I believe at that point it's no longer a public health, emotional health, or behavioral health question. It's a matter of individual election. So would I participate in a world like that? Sure. But would I reside in that world predominantly? Most likely no, because I'm stubborn and I have things that I find really enjoyable in this reality that I've created for myself at this point. But I'm okay with being understanding that, for instance, we might be the last of the Mohicans. Like, that's okay.
So you're not going to be crafting tables in the metaverse?
No, because I get so much joy out of doing it in the here and now. It's meditative. For instance, like if I'm standing at a table, I literally might do it for 8 hours in a day, just sanding it, because everything else falls away. And so I have just having had that experience and working on things and put a lot of hours into something, I just understand from a neuroscience perspective, it's going to be very difficult for me to ascribe a greater value to crafting a table in the metaverse than what I've already done in this reality, and then the habit that I formed associated with it. So that's the challenge with habits. If it's good habits, that's fantastic. If it's bad habits are just difficult to change. And so I'm kind of hardwired at this point in a certain way that it would take a concerted effort for me to find something more enjoyable than what I already do with it. So I think I'll probably be, one of the last ones left out.
Yeah. I don't know. It's it's kind of an absurd question. I think it will become of increasing importance.
Agreed.
My suspicion is there's something quite distinct about reality that intuitively I think most people kind of understand. But then again, maybe it's just the fact that that was where we were raised. So,
and it could be, and that's the case. The That's why we have the tech natives, right? So they might have a different perspective on it, and then that's okay. Sometimes society gets in trouble when they bemoan how the previous generations bemoan the subsequent generation of like they're rude and everything. Get off my lawn. I'm going to not do that. I'm going to say if that generation of tech natives elects to move forward in that way and it's healthy, and they're doing it from an informed and intentional perspective, who am I to be like, no, you shouldn't do that?
And the healthy part, so for you, that would be the signal that you would look for would be like the clinical outcomes and research data, or what would you look for as far as, where would you look for that?
Yeah, I look at what the research shows in regards to, let's go with the base metrics, right? So depression, anxiety, loneliness, which are focused on identifying the rate, frequency, intensity, and duration of those. But then I would also look to something that's incredibly important is the things that can serve as, let's call it vaccines to those, which would be self-esteem, connection, and social support. So let's not just measure the bad, let's measure the things that can be preventative in nature. So I would like to see those three increase because those serve as protective factors at that point against depression, anxiety, loneliness, suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, self-injurious behavior, stuff like that. So let's measure all of it, the good and the bad. And if the good is really good and the bad is significantly decreasing, then, and it's over an extended period of time, over a wide population, corrected for differences in the population, then go forth and do. And I'm going to hang out at the lake in my cabin and read my books and know that the world is okay.
Nice. Yeah. And next generation will be doing that with their NFT books in the Metaverse.
That's right. That's right. And then totally there, right? No problem with it.
Interesting. Do you have time for two more questions?
Sure.
Okay. So one is a topic that came up before we were recording of deep work, kind of related to some of the thinking and everything else. This is an idea that's been popularized by Cal Newport.
Sure.
Wrote a book of the same name. You were saying that deep work is something that you've not only implemented personally, or something that you do, but also with your colleagues. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what that's been like, maybe what deep work is, and how you've used it.
Yeah, sure. So deep work is something that a lot of people don't want to engage in. They want the results without the work associated with it. But the way to conceptualize deep work is to identify something or a very small group of things, ideas, concepts, projects, growth, development, whatever it might be, that's very important to you, but it requires significant mental and cognitive energy over a duration of time, fortitude. Like you are going to have to go deep within yourself in introspection and then work very hard to bring it into fruition. So that's deep work. Yeah. Now, most people have ideas of things, but would much rather respond to text messages, emails, and engage in what we call like surface level interactions. So in the work that I have done, focused on deep work with clients that have expressed a desire to go there is, we've got to go foundational with it of, all right, a real strong and firm understanding of where they are, and then what the project or projects are that they're thinking of that they want to go deep in, where it's going to require strenuous effort and intentional over an extended period of time to understand, okay, where are you trying to go, where you are, and then what's your why? Because we got to have that why, because that's going to serve as the fuel when we just want to give in. And understanding what are the processes that we need to put in place to make that effective for them. So, for instance, when I wrote my book on video game addiction, that was a deep work process where I isolated myself and removed all distractions for 3 to 4 hours at a clip. And I was left with my printed up scientific journals that I was researching and reading from, and a laptop. And I stayed away from all forms of distractions. I did not respond to text messages. I did not respond to emails. No distractions, just me and the work. Think of it almost as like a crucible. So for me, I figured out from a process perspective what that needed to look like. I needed to have it printed out. I needed to have plenty of notepads available, highlighters, a laptop that was charged, and a phone that was left outside of the room, and my email notifications turned off. And then the discipline necessary to get to that point of going from 1 hour of that type of work up to about 3 to 4 hours a day. Cal's research shows that max we can sustain is about 4 hours a day. And for most of my people, it turns out that the most effective time period for them to engage in deep work is usually somewhere right towards the start of the day. And there's no surprise with it. Everything that we do that requires a decision, whether we think about it or not, drains our gas tank of willpower. And our day's over when our gas tank of willpower is empty. So something as simple as getting up and brushing my teeth. Well, I've made easily half a dozen decisions just to do that.
Right.
So the majority of my people have specific days of the week that they're doing deep work. And we're very specific about what the work is, what their process or processes is, and what's their why. Now, for some of them, it's been career changes. For some of them, it's been focused on the development of diversification of income streams for themselves. So they have a W-2 job, but now they also have a side hustle or side hustles that's focused on getting them to a position where they can have enough security and a side hustle to make that a primary hustle, because what they really want is independence and freedom, because that is something that they felt like they did not have as a child. So this is where it all starts to tie together. And it's focused on the investment of something that I might not see the payoff from this for a number of years. But to get that payoff is going to require exacting, intense, sustained work at a level that I cannot do if I'm engaging in the daily distractions of text message, emails, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of people have ideas of like, yeah, I want my life to look like this, or I want to change this about myself. But when it comes down to like the steps necessary to actually do that, they're not willing to put in that effort with it. And so that's what, long synopsis of deep work is: identifying where you are, where you want to be, something that's important to you. What's your why? What are the steps that you need to take? What's your process or processes? And then we got to sustain this over a long period of time. But the payoff is going to be something probably better than you even envision. My last thought on it would be this concept that I discussed with Rutgers students. Rutgers has me guest lecture about 300 students every year for career management. And I say to them, something that's been important for my personal growth and development, as well as my professional growth and development, is there's been a lot of days where I have done what others won't. And I'm at the spot now where I can do what others can't.
It's profound.
Yeah.
Create value, solve problems.
Yeah. Make yourself indispensable, and then make yourself, based on your skill set, indispensable to the point that you can then have a lot more self-determination and freedom. Captain of my own ship instead of somebody telling me what it is that I have to do for 40 plus hours a week.
So I want to ask you a question. We can totally edit this out, but if you'd be willing to share, like, what is your why?
For what? For everything that I do?
Yeah.
There's so many different components to it. One is because I shudder at the thought of having to be reliant on a single source of income. Another is that the way that my mind works, I have a high degree of mental acuity. I get bored with things rather quickly. So I could only last in a traditional job if the job wasn't changing for like 18 months. And then if it was changing, it would have to change significantly to keep me engaged. Part of it is just personality. I have a relatively rare personality type that like 2% of the world has. 2% of the world has. So I'm always focused on better, even if they're good. And it's not that I don't find a lack of enjoyment in there. I'm just focused on optimization all the time, but it's not necessarily by choice. It's like I don't choose to breathe. It just happens. So that's why I like my consultant work so much, or that's why I just crush business books like at an insane clip, because I have to.
Yeah.
And if I stop engaging in those things, then I become insane. Like, you don't want to be around me at those points. And then other parts of it is focused on this compulsion of like, just need to continue to grow. Like personally, professionally, it's like compulsion. Need to. Happy where it's at, but can't stop here. Got to do more. So some of my why,
entrepreneurial streak.
Yeah. So some of my why is healthy, some of it's not healthy, but not all anxiety is bad. Bill Gates talks about productive anxiety. Scared that somebody's going to come take that which you've created, and so it forces you or compels you to continue to work later and harder and shit like that.
I think it was Socrates. Know thyself, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, now you get into is it Ryan Clark's territory, the Mr. Stoicism himself. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work, but he's put out about 10 books on it.
No, I'm not.
Oh my God, he's fantastic. I'm reading on one of his now. Ego is the enemy.
Ego is the enemy. Ryan Clark.
Yeah.
Check that out.
I think it's,
just before you go, if it's okay, I did want to ask something that we had talked about before that I think would be good for people to hear about is, you're really on the front lines of mental health crisis. You're working with clients, you met a lot of parents, you've talked to a lot of experts, you've seen a lot. This is a topic that's getting more attention, perhaps not enough, but of all the things that you've seen, what's something that you think is not getting more attention right now that really should?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so we're going to say that social media, video games are starting to get some attention, as they should, and the impact of it. Yeah. The person that I worry about the most, if we're saying youth and young adults, is the one that looks like they have everything going. So I took, let's see. Yeah, I've probably interacted with, had conversations and spent time with maybe 2,000, 3,000 youth and young adults in the past 2 years or so, in various capacities. The ones that I worry about the most, actually, are the ones that like everything seems to, on paper, to be like going in the right direction for them. So the ones that are doing really well academically, socially, athletically, they've got seemingly strong relationships, hobbies, interests, things like that. I'm concerned about what I call duck syndrome. You're not going to find it in the DSM-5. It's not a clinical diagnosis. It's just, I don't know if I came up with it or I stole it from somebody. But in essence, duck syndrome is, you look at a duck on the water, and they just glide across the pond. You look at me go in the water, I'm splashing and all that stuff. So that is duck syndrome, where I'm looking at somebody and it looks like everything is going smoothly for them. What we need to do, though, is also just make sure by looking underneath the water. And what you're going to see underneath the water with a duck in a pond is their little feet paddling furiously. So I have, let's call it roughly 30% of the people that I work with, you would never expect to be working with a therapist. They are successful, they are articulate, they are erudite, which means they are well-read, they do well academically, they are social. It looks like they have everything going for them. And yet, they somehow ended up with me. And really what they're presenting with is they actually, in spite of everything going for them, feel that they're really scared of being rejected. And then why are they scared of being rejected? Well, because then it confirms the greatest fear that they have, which is inadequacy. And if we drill down with them, well, what are you scared that you're inadequate of? It's everything. They're not good looking enough. They're not smart enough. They're not social enough. They're not athletically talented enough. And this is in spite of the fact that they are. But in comparison to, well, they always, this subsect of the population engages in that hardcore upward comparison. So I've got, I refer to them as like my stable of stallions that you would never expect to have challenges. And they present with some of the biggest challenges, actually. From a like an emotional health perspective. They're some of the most damaged ones out there, and nobody knows. So anybody that is doing really well, I hope that to be the case. It might have been, I forgot who said it, but somebody said trust but verify. Let's check in and just make sure that what we're seeing actually is an accurate representation, and not just a house that looks really good, but you get up close and you see paint on it and this thing's about to fall apart. Let's make sure. So that's the population I'm scared of.
And I think that's quite practical too. I'm thinking, parents, really anybody, we all have relationships. I think, maybe, parents are concerned about unhealthy relationships with tech with one of the kids. It's like, the other one who's doing really well in these other dimensions, like remember to give them a little attention as well. Check in. So
absolutely. When we're talking about family dynamics, the hero child is the one that we should be really concerned about. See, the squeaky wheel gets all of the attention. It's the other one that falls by the wayside, whose needs are just not being met on a consistent basis. And then they're doing everything they can to try and keep some degree of equilibrium in the family. But it takes a toll on them, and they're not getting the support that they need for it. So that's the one that I'm really concerned about.
Good reminder for all of us.
Yes.
Yep. Cool. All right. Well, Andrew, this was a pleasure. I learned a lot today. I'm sure our audience will as well. I really enjoyed it, especially given that we've spent now a couple of hours together. Appreciate you giving me some of that deep work and attention time. So thanks for coming on the show, and I hope to have you back on at some point in the future.
Sure. Loved being here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Oh, one last thing I forgot is folks can connect with you, and we'll put this in the show notes. They can learn more about what you're up to at therapywithandrew.com. Is that right?
Correct. Yep. Therapywithandrew.com.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrew.